Hello everyone, good afternoon, or maybe good morning or good evening, depending on where you're based. Thank you for being with us here today. I'm really excited to launch this new team webinar season. My name is Anaïs Roche and I'm the International Development Manager of Aware. So today we will learn about modern and contemporary women artists of Middle Eastern origin, thanks to our three special guests, Ceren, Özpinar, Lina, Kattan, and Nadia, Radwan. So thank you very much for having accepted the invitation, and a special thanks to Ceren, our team member, for having suggested to speak alongside other colleagues, because I really like this idea of collective talk and plurality of perspectives. So together, you will outline the key players and issues at play for modern and contemporary women artists, as I said, of Middle Eastern origin, working either in the Middle East or the West, and focusing in particular on issues related to intersectional research methodologies. You will also address recent developments in Middle Eastern feminist art history and current debates on gender and intersectionality in the art world. So before we really go into the topic of this webinar, I want to give some technical information first. So please note that the audio will be muted except for our panelists. You will, of course, have the opportunity to participate and interact with us via text in the Q&A. And we expect the webinar to be interactive, so please don't hesitate to ask questions, and I will share them with our guests. Please also note that the webinar will be recorded and available on our website. You can already have a look to the past webinars if you missed some of them. They are all recorded and uploaded on our dedicated page. So before I give the floor to our guests, I also would like to say a few words about Aware and about team. So let me share my screen with you. Sorry. Okay, so I guess you see the screen right now. So I guess that if you're here, you already know Aware, so I will try to be quick. Aware stands for Archives of Women Artists, Research and Exhibition. It's a French nonprofit co-founded in 2014 by Camille Morinot. She's an art historian and specialist in the history of women artists. She curated the exhibition Elle at Centre Pompidou in 2009, among many others, of course, but this one is quite a historical one here in France. So our goal at Aware is to produce and distribute information on women artists of both the 19th and 20th centuries, especially through our website, which you can see here at the homepage. We welcome more than 50,000 visitors a month, a number which is constantly increasing. So we are quite proud of this number and the interest people have, either students, scholars, and our audience on women artists. So we collaborate with major museums, universities, and research centers internationally, and our action also relies on public funding, donations from private sponsors, foundations, and companies. So this month is quite special to us because we celebrate our 800th biography on our website, and also our move to a new place in Paris. We will open to the public next January with a fresh new documentation center, a research residency, and a public program. So let me, so you can see here our index. And let me say a few words also about TEAM. Teaching, e-learning, agency, and mentoring is an international academic program we launched last year. So we are just, with this webinar, opening the second TEAM season. Team is dedicated to the production and sharing of knowledge about women artists around the world. This program is led by Maura Riley. She's an American curator specializing in feminist art and co-founder of the Elizabeth Sackler Center for Feminist Arts at the Brooklyn Museum in New York, and she's currently teaching at the Arizona State University. Team's main purpose is to enrich our online index of women artists with priority given to geographic areas that are still underrepresented on our websites, because we think that if we want to write a more inclusive history of art, we have to consider not only gender issues, but also cultural and geographical ones. And the second aim of Team is to support the training of a new generation of art historians who will be aware of gender issues and the place of women artists in the history of art. And finally, Team is, of course, also a network of solidarity and transnational reflection on the issues shared by these art historians. To date, we have 14 members and 65 students, mainly masters and doctorates, working with these teachers and researchers over the 5 continents, even if, of course, we can't represent the whole world with 14 members, but we're trying to do our best. So, and these webinars are part of this program. The idea of it is to allow you to meet our great team members and give also them the opportunity to share their research and projects alongside other guest speakers, art historians, curators that are not necessarily part of Team, but who are supportive of our cause, as it is the case today. So thank you, Ceren. Sorry, here you have, I forgot to share this slide with you. You have the whole network represented here, and Maura Riley, who is the head of this program. So thank you, Ceren, Lina, and Nadia for having accepted our invitation for the 6th Team webinar today. So I will start with you, Lina, as you will have to leave earlier. So I will introduce you and tell also our audience that you will have 5-10 minutes to ask quick question right after Lina's presentation, because she won't be here for the final debate with you. So Dr. Lina Kattan, so you're Associate Professor of Visual and Performing Arts. You're also currently Chair of Drawing and Arts Department at the University of Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. You were born in Jeddah, a city envisioned to be an open-air museum in the 70s. You also traveled to the United States, and you graduated from Texas Tech University. You lived in multiple cultures, and this had actually a great impact on your research focus, because your primary goal is to discover the so-called culture in-betweenness. So you developed a keen interest in feminism that concerns women's issues in the Middle East and Arab/Muslim women's misrepresentation in the media. Your research focuses on the implication of figuration and representing the female body in Saudi painting and photography. So Lina, I give you the floor, and I will introduce Ceren and Nadia after your presentation and the audience's questions. So I just remind you, you will each of you have about 20 minutes, and then we will have 5-10 minutes for quick questions, and then at the end, 20 minutes, half an hour for the debates with the audience, and I'm sure there will be many, many questions. So it's up to you, Lina.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you for having me, Anis and Ceren, and nice to meet you also, Nadia. It's a pleasure. So did you see my screen? Is it shared? All right, so basically I want to share with you guys the findings of my research, the recent one, And I have, some, you get to say that I have multiple kind of research interests, but basically it's connected to the cultural in-betweenness, as Anis just said, and women issues in the Middle East. And I want to focus on the figuration and the representation of Arab Muslim women in the media. So I'm gonna today try to focus my research or my talk about the recent one, and it's still ongoing research because it's a very interesting one to me, and I want to share the findings with you guys. And please, I'm gonna be honored if you get to share your feedback or your kind of input on that. I'm going to be focusing on self-portraiture and the question of identity, in particularly Saudi art. So in any Western museum, one would encounter many paintings by artists who create portraits of themselves to acquire self-recognition among other society. When asked about numerous self-portraits, Frida Kahlo replied, "I paint myself because I'm so often alone and because I'm the subject I know best." The tradition of self-representation was invented in a culture where figuration is relatively permissible. So many artists used their own likeness to be the subject matter of their masterpieces. Be it for self-vocation, practice, or outright narcissism, these artists paved the way for the practice of self-portraiture to become a genre of its own. Through self-representation, artists emphasize individualism by creating likeness and therefore becoming both the observing and the subject observed. However, the story is different in the Middle East, where Islam is the major religion. Self-representation is not as common as it is in the West. Anyone familiar with the Saudi art scene would notice how rare self-representation is, even for artists who usually depict living beings. Self-representation is an unusual art genre, mainly for religious, educational, and personal reasons. In a broad sense, and due to the well-known prohibition regarding the depiction of living beings, many artists avoid portraying even fragmented or partial figures. When dealing with art, Saudi culture integrates Islamic teachings and personal opinions alongside Arabian traditions. Painting as a technique of creating constituted a long-held debate within the Muslim cultures. Painting is handmade, which is a product of human art. Consequently, some classic Muslim scholars consider painting as a form of imitating Allah in his act of creation from nonentity. Thus, figurative painting is a suspect in religious terms. Photography, on the other hand, given its technological-based mediation, doesn't, in Saudi mindset, attempt to rival Allah's act of creation, and to some extent is still regarded as non-art. When photography was first introduced to Arabs, the older generation mistakenly believed that the person photographed can capture one's soul and could therefore be used for ill-mannered purposes such as black magic. There are two reasons for this thought process. First, photography from a Saudi mindset or perspective, it is not an artistic creation because many Saudis until today believe that it is an exact replica of reality. A human uses the machine or the camera as a tool, so a human is indirectly depicting reality. In this context, the photographer is not competing with Allah in his act of creation, because man here is only transcribing Allah's creation. Secondly, photography is not considered an art genre in Saudi culture because man has nothing to do with it. The machine does everything. Hence, the photographer is not an artist, but simply one who wields technology. Therefore, photographing full figure living beings is both religiously and socially permissible in today's Saudi mentality. Aside from religious intentions, other Saudi artists might disregard the idea of self-representation for educational reasons. Because figurative art is not celebrated in the kingdom, educational institutions didn't include figurative training in their curricula. Accordingly, artists lack the artistic training and creative guidance to render self-portraiture. As for personal reasons, many Saudi artists don't approve nor follow Western postmodern art characteristics, including individualism and self-involvement, which are disregarded in Islam. On the other hand, modesty is greatly praised because egocentrism was the main reason behind Adam's expulsion from paradise. In my research, I argue that self-portraiture has become a new technique for Saudi female artists to question the identity within the masculine canon, while shedding light on overlapping factors of defiance and recognition to reclaim the act of looking. Until recently, I couldn't find any published Saudi male portraits, even by artists known for painting living beings. However, two artists used photographs of themselves to represent their art. They're called Ayman Daidaban and Hamza Jamjoom. Daidaban introduced the only one known male self-representation in 2014. His entitled contains a picture of himself when he was a young boy, integrated with the artwork. Jamjoom, an amateur artist, based his social media photography on his self-portrayal, which was not intended to be recognized as artworks. Beginning as a fad or a hobby, Jamjoom transferred the concept of dressing up in distinctive and sometimes shocking costumes to be the primary focus of his imagery. Some art critics consider his images as nothing more than creative selfies. Other works were found to represent the self-potentiality, but such works don't go beyond the idea of practicing artistic skills by copying self-images from photographs, such as in the case of Abdullah Dahri. Essentially, it doesn't go far from utilizing the medium of photography one way or another. Unexpectedly, Saudi female artists tend to take the lead in this art genre. In the case of female artists, Islamic religion can magnify the potential controversy. To explain it, Muslim women veil in public. Many even cover their faces. Therefore, unveiling or revealing their image or identity through self-portraits could be discouraged on both personal and social levels. The first known Saudi female portrait was done by Safiya bin Zagir, which is nationally recognized as the Saudi Mona Lisa. Both women have an enigmatic smile, wear a head veil and seated in a chair, and have similar play of hands, while an Islamically patterned background replaces the Western landscape. In her painting, bin Zagir appears in a Hijazi national dress called Zaboon, which used to be worn in the turn of the 20th century of Western region of Saudi Arabia. During the rise of the so-called Saudi art in the 70s, bin Zagir appalled her audience when she revealed her self-image to the public with bits of her shown. She combined Western modern techniques with traditional themes due to her overseas education. For a Saudi woman, it was a courageous and uncommon act to pursue. At the same time, both paintings and photography were discouraged. In Islam, females shouldn't expose themselves to non-relative males, and therefore should not expose their self-representation in public as art. However, bin Zagir's reputation as a preservationist of tradition helped to deflect some criticism. Even though one might expect that her work could be rejected, it was unexpectedly welcomed by the people because preserving the fading cultural heritage overrules any other controversies. Later in the 80s, Mona Al-Ghasabi produced a series of paintings in which she portrays herself as the primary subject. In most of her paintings, a cat accompanies her self-portraits, and the cat changes according to the artist's portrait style. The painting on the left includes a white cat with a background that looks like loose impressionist brush strokes. The other work includes a wild-haired brown woman and a cat, which is more reminiscent of expressionist handling. Her portrait is relatively modified and therefore her likeness is altered. In this context, her paintings may represent her imagined and modified everlasting self-image. At the beginning of the 21st century, in a collage-like style, the sisters Shadia and Raja Alam integrated their own photographs into a wedding scene. Apparently, they used cut-out images of their faces and then imposed them over a wedding picture. One person stands while one sits. The brides, including everyone else in the picture, are both dressed in white. It seems like these cutouts were pasted on a commercial advertising poster where a fragment of an English text reads, "Be certain we got it right." This is a sarcastic way to question the act of using a digital photo editor to fabricate women's images in the media. They reverse social norms by revealing their self-images and then recall the unusual color of abaya and burqa by concealing the groom's faces with a black marker. The bride's white garments in this context not only reference Islamic virtue, but also symbolize women's purity and optimism. At the turn of the 21st century, Hind al-Mansour, a famous Saudi painter, notoriously portrayed her image without any stylistic alteration. In a series of 4 paintings, al-Mansour uses the medium of painting to explore her identity and self-image. In identity number 2, she uses more of an expressionist brushworks and includes a profile of hers that gazes at her own portrait, alongside with her viewers, but only one image gazes back at the viewer. By combining Arabic and English handwritten texts, she charges her composition with symbolism. Both texts revolve around ideas of identity, individualism, and self-recognition. The text integrated in this self-portrait suggests that she expresses her own struggles as a Saudi woman. Thus, her self-image conquers her paintings. Like the Alam sisters, Fatma An-Nimr decoupages her self-photographs within mixed media works. Using an old-style veiling, she uncovers her face and therefore her identity to the public. Even though her self-photographs are meshed with highly decorated Islamic background, it is quite easy to identify the artist. Then Iman al-Jibrin integrates her image veiled in burqa with digital prints of famous masterpieces. This way, she is involved within the masterpiece original scenario, even though she digitally modified it. As a post-colonial critique, her self-representation is quite incorporated within the context. Unlike An-Nimr, who reveals her face or identity to the public, Jibrin still maintains cultural sensibilities by veiling her face or identity in public. Saudi female artists have gone further by utilizing cutting-edge technology such as videography. Sara Abu Abdullah visually expresses her daily struggles as a woman, whether in photography or video. She is the only focal point in her work. In soft power, she sits veiled in a bedroom and by a closet full of colorful clothing, with a hidden identity by the burqa. Her bare feet are unlikely shown and elevated from the floor because she is sitting on the table instead of the bed. While in the salad zone, she lies disorderly inside a huge cooking pot, sitting unveiled and gazing out at viewers. This large pot is typically used by Saudi males when cooking meals for large gatherings. The combinations of the male's cooking pot, disorientation, veiling, and isolation suggest that she is served up to an unknown audience. Hence the title, in which the word salad signifies chaos in Saudi culture. It explains the chaos around her and the chaotic served dish. By intertwining social standards such as veiling, gender segregation, and a large cooking pot, and notions of mockery, constructing her individuality seems to be the ultimate goal of her art. A successor of the well-known Saudi female artist bin Zagar, Najat Mutahhar follows her successor steps of documenting the fading face of the Hijazi history. In a more naturalistic style and melancholy atmosphere, Mutahhar courageously depicts her own likeness on canvas. Mutahhar brilliantly continues to celebrate some of the disappearing cultural heritage. What is interesting about her paintings is that she paints moments of time that she didn't live in. Mutahhar most probably relies on legendary narratives from the people around her who lived in that age, and then combines it with an interior settings and antiques found in the old city of Mecca where she lives. Even though her painting is slightly modified, such as her facial expressions, age, and attire, the viewer can easily recognize the artist. She mainly relies on accentuating nostalgic images in both subject matter and style. Similar to bin Zagar, her national reputation as preservationist of folkloric apparel and long-gone social custom prevented her from social disapproval. Moreover, Mutahhar is considered luckier than her successor because she is painting in a different time, in which the Saudi culture now is considered slightly more open-minded than it was 40 years ago, especially concerning the religious prohibition of figuration. Finally, Hind Talal, an emergent artist, introduced one of the powerful contemporary self-portraits. While she wears a veil, her face is not completely shown to viewers because her hand gestures act like a face burqa. The black and white self-image accentuates the gloomy mood of the picture, in which the artist seems to have forcibly placed her hands over her mouth. Her non-accepting gesture is echoed in the way she boldly gazes back to the viewer. In short, her own hands are silencing her, but she reveals another kind of self-control, the power of gaze. In her well-known film theory, The Male Gaze, Laura Mulvey introduced the concept of the gaze, which is how the viewer deals with people presented on screen, and how the audience views women through their perspective of male viewers. Feminists utilize this concept in art to be thought in three ways: how men observe women, how women view themselves, and how women look at other women on screen. Jonathan Schroeder proposed that to gaze implies more than to look at. It signifies a psychological relationship of power in which the gazer is superior to the object of the gaze. In this circumstance, the gaze creates the power structure in which the gazer or the bearer of the look has more power over the person being gazed upon, or what he termed to be looked at. The act of looking is connected to power. To look is to assess and to possess. In this context, the act of looking empowers the looker with more influence and control to eventually challenge authority. Today, binarism of active-passive doesn't have a definite boundary. Being in public forces individuals, especially women, to be a target of the gaze. The power of the gaze simultaneously belittles the object of the gaze while empowering the spectator. In return, the gaze affects the way in which individuals view the world around them. Because we all are being compared against the representations constructed by white heterosexual male preferences. Such preferences may culturally vary, but most visual representations favor the male gazers. Truth can be exposed. in the way in which artists want to be viewed by their audience, and the way they desire to view their own self-image to themselves. What differentiates self-portraiture from the other stylistic, other artistic style is the reverse gaze of the portrayed figure. And in this case, the artist deliberately gazes back at the viewer. The postmodern era emphasizes skepticism and individualism. Thus, artists began putting themselves more into the picture. The pursuit of the elusive self, it seems, never ends. Accordingly, this sort of imagery complicates meaning and interpretation because the viewer's attention alternates between viewing the image as a picture of themselves and as a self-portrait. In general, acquiring self-recognition, gaining agency, and questioning the new identity seem to be the main motivation behind development of female self-portraiture in Saudi Arabia. Women felt the need to present themselves in the art world, which had previously been dominated by males. Therefore, Saudi female artists tend to pursue a different artistic style from their counterparts. Female subjects differ than males, in which they need to connect their bodies with the self when performing social critique about the daily struggle they undergo. Women are fearless, courageous, powerful, educated, have agency of their bodies, making statements through art and re-examining artistic traditions and presenting new visual experiences of the optimistic future. Instead of being gazed upon and being judged by their appearance or unveiled identities, Saudi women artists now return the gaze and show the audience how they perceive the world around them. In conclusion, self-presentation, whether if it's a painting, a photograph, or even a selfie, has become a new attitude for Saudi female artists to demonstrate how agency could be elaborated through visual narratives of gender equality and equal opportunities within the artistic domain of expression. Unlike Western notions of autobiography, Saudi female self-portraiture positions female art productions within modernistic realms. Saudi self-portraiture deals with overlapping issues of identity, defiance, and self-recognition. Feminist sensibilities ground their differentiation from other types of self-representation. This explains why males don't feel the need to establish their identities as Saudi women do. For each female artist, the moment of self-portraiture is in Saudi art varies for diverse reasons. Like many modernist female artists, Saudi women are appropriating the masculinity of their society and the art world itself in order to par with contemporary realms and to question their Saudi identity, whether using a digital apparatus or painting an image without resource to a photographic intervention. Saudi women artists utilize the genre of self-portraiture to visualize both their inner voice in order to reclaim the act of looking. They manage to do so by reversing the gaze at their audience. These feminist attitudes stem from the determination to depict a positive image of contemporary Saudi women who are progressive and unconstrained by outdated traditions. They document shifts in culture conception of modernity, especially regarding responsibilities and choices for women, while maintaining their Arabian cultural traditions and Islamic identity. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Lina, for your great presentation.
Thank you.
Is there any question in the audience? Yeah, we have a comment from Ceren. Ceren, do you want me to read your question, or you can also say it? Okay, I will read Ceren's comment and question. So fascinating presentation, Lina. Thank you for introducing us to the work of so many Saudi women artists. I was wondering if you'd like to talk a little bit about the importance of Safia Binskar for the Saudi art history, and I'm really sorry if I misspelled her name.
Yes, Safia bin Zaghir is considered one of the famous Saudi artists, and she's still living, and she's an icon of Saudi art. She studied abroad in Italy and France, so she kind of, had this kind of huge background of depicting figures and figurative art. As I mentioned in my research, that self-portraiture or depicting full figure living beings is kind of, not recommended in many Muslim cultures. Safia bin Zaghir tried to, to document the fading history of the cultural heritage, especially the one in the Western region. So because of the rare kind of, artworks about this subject matter, she kind of avoided the controversy of figuration, because she's doing them, something good. Because so the idea of preserving the history kind of overruled the religious controversy. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Lina. We have another comment and question from Andrea Giunta. So thank you, very interesting presentation, Lina, Kattan. For Latin American women artists, self-portrait was also a common topic. And it has to do also with the relationship between view and power. Many times it was considered for the critique as a narcissistic exercise. It was a pathologization of the portrait. Her question is, how is the critical reception of these self-portraits?
The critical what? Reception? Yes, as I mentioned, because I think we have some sort of, a connection with the Latin culture. And I think because of the traditional way of thinking, I guess, especially in the old generation, we have this kind of idea of to avoid narcissism and to avoid anything related to Western kind of, culture. Some would try to avoid it to get to how let me rephrase it. So they try to avoid any kind of Western kind of tradition, just to make their own identity and not to be a copy of these kind of other cultures. And also in Islam, as I mentioned, it's recommended not to be self-involved and to try to maintain individualism and narcissism. So this way, some of the artists, not all, that they might consider it as self kind of involvement of or egocentrism. But I think it's not mainly the case or the main reason. The main reason it was religious, because if we have it, if we didn't have anything against figuration, it would be something else.
Thank you. We also have another quite close question from Andrea Ginta's one, from Agata Jakubowska. Her question is, how does the reception of these works differ depending on where they're shown? So it's kind of the same question, but with a more geographical, maybe, approach.
From where it's shown?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, so we have in Saudi Arabia, different kind of, regions. Some of the regions are so, they follow the traditional or kind of, conservative, the religious scholars' opinions. Say they would still kind of, not recommend figuration at all, whether if it's partial figures or full figures. On the other hand, like in the Western region, where the famous Safiya bin Zaghar kind of, showed her her work and still showing many figures in her work, it's not they appreciate the artworks by themselves, but sometimes artists try to avoid figuration, even though they kind of collect them or kind of try or buy them or hang them in their houses, but at the same time they would avoid figuration just to be on the safe side. They're not sure. But now with the new kind of studies and scholarship on the religion, and especially concerning figuration, the idea of it became so comprehensible and acceptable than it was before. So figuration started to become so common in the Saudi art scene.
Okay, thank you. Is there any last question? Yes, we have one from Nadia. So I will read it if you prefer, Nadia. You're okay with that?
Sure,
okay.
Sure.
Okay, so thank you, Lina, for this fascinating talk. I was wondering if you could say something about the notion of amateurism in the early history of portraiture in Saudi Arabia and the role of photography or even digital selfies in the self-training of certain artists. Could you, second question, could you elaborate on this aspect of art training in Saudi Arabia in comparison to the other contexts in MENA, so Middle East, North Africa, where Western training institutions were established as part of colonial enterprise? It's
okay. Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. I don't want to take much time to answer the questions and from my colleagues to present their research, but mainly because of the well-known prohibition concerning the figuration or figurative art. So the educational institutions kind of didn't recommend integrating this kind of idea in their curricula. So even if the students want to, they didn't recommend that, or be it on the extracurricular kind of way, and they tried to avoid displaying it in public. But this was maybe 50 to 60 years ago. So because of the lack of educational kind of training, the generation of the artists, we get to say from the 60s until the 80s, they lacked this kind of artistic training in figuration and anatomical kind of studies. So you don't get to see figurative kind of or figures in the art scene because they lack of the training. And I forgot the other question. the first one.
No, but actually, just maybe shortly, it's part of the same question. I'm just wondering if this sort of self-training doesn't give also agency to these women artists in comparison to, I'd say, Egypt, where institutional sort of Western institutions were sort of established as part of a colonial project. So amateurism can also be freedom. That was a little bit my question.
Yes, I like this kind of idea, and I'm going to integrate this thought in my my research, because now I kind of you kind of link it all together to me that trying to study this and do this self-training would add more agency for these women artists to to present themselves in the art scene, especially in Saudi Arabia and later on globally. Yes, this is a very interesting one. Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you.
One last comment, and if you have time to answer the question, otherwise maybe we can just keep this question or share maybe emails later on. From the audience, from Zelal Basodan, The prohibition of figurative in Islam also depends on of the Islamic school, Mzhab, as many believe that a 3D figurative is more prohibited than in 2D as paintings. What is your thoughts?
What's the question? Say again.
What is your thoughts about this the prohibition of figurative in Islam between a 3D figurative more prohibited than 2D in paintings?
Yeah, the 3D and 2D. Yes, I've done this kind of research in my dissertation. I studied in depth the idea of depicting figures, especially the in painting and photography. But the idea that I found that the conservative and the old Muslim scholars, they depended on they have this lack of or disconnect in the between the Arabic language and the idea of art by itself. So the word taswir, or meaning to depict or to represent in Arabic, means to depict something, but on 3D or not a flat surface. So this kind of caused controversy and miscomprehension to the idea of figurative figuration in 2D. So when I did some research on the religious texts and scriptures, I found out that yes, many Muslim scholars, especially the conservative ones, kind of recommend, or not recommending the idea of figuration, but not on a flat surface. They agreed upon the idea of the 3D figures, even though it's mentioned in the Quran when that the prophet and King Solomon, he asked his the servants of him to do some 3D figures, the sculptures. So I kind of re-examine these texts, and I kind of agree with the modern scholars who kind of rethought the idea of figuration, and that they finally found out that it was misrepresented, not comprehended very well. So yes, and all it depends on the intention. So whether the intention to become idols or to do it for the sake of art. So yeah, if you I don't have time to explain everything, but if you want, I can send you the open link for my dissertation. It's done in depth.
Please. Thank you. Again, Lina, was fascinating, and I'm sure there are many other questions. But I know you have to leave.
Yeah.
So thank you again for your time and for sharing your research.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Lina. Bye.
Bye.
So time is running. I'm moving now to Ceren. So a brief introduction about who you are, your background, and your work. So Dr. Ceren Özpinar, you are a senior lecturer in the History of Art and Design program at the University of Brighton in the UK. Your research focuses on contemporary art, art historiography, and feminist art, as well as art histories with a special focus on Turkey and the Middle East since the 1960s. You received major awards from research bodies, including the University of Brighton's Rising Star, the Getty Foundation CCA International Programme Award 3 times, and the British Academy's Newton International Fellowship. Your first monograph, The Art Historiography in Turkey, 1970s, 2010, was published in 2016 in Turkish. The volume you have co-edited, Under the Skin, Feminist Art and Art Histories from the Middle East and North Africa Today, was published with Oxford University Press last year. And your last monograph, Politics of Writing, Art Histories, Narratives of Contemporary Art, Feminism and Women Artists from Turkey, was published by the Time publisher this year, a few months ago, I guess. So your latest article on Gülsün Kara Mustafa appeared in the September 2019 issue of the Art Journal. So Ceren, I think your PowerPoint is ready, so I give you the floor. Thank you, Ceren.
Thank you, Anais. Thank you for that comprehensive introduction, and thank you, Lina, for that very interesting presentation. And I would also like to thank Aware and Camille Marino for the invitation to do this webinar, and for Nadia for joining us. It's great to be here, and thanks for everybody who has joined us today rather than going out, because we know restrictions, COVID restrictions have been eased in many places. So thanks for being here with us. Okay, so I am only going to focus on two artists today in my limited time in 20 minutes. And I'm aiming to introduce you to the work of two women artists from Turkey, or should I say connected loosely to Turkey. And they're separated by 50 years, but both identify themselves as a feminist in their own way. And I believe they address similar political concerns in their work. Zehra Doğan on the left-hand side and Nadia on the right-hand side. So I will start with talking about Zehra Doğan's work a little, and then I will move on to Nadia's work and only focus on one artwork by her. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with that artwork. So in 2016, Zehra Doğan, an artist and a reporter for the Kurdish all-female news agency called Jinha, Jin means woman in Kurdish, was arrested for disseminating of terrorist propaganda. When she was detained by the police, Doğan was having a little coffee in a coffee house with her colleagues in Nusaybin, a small Kurdish majority town in the southeast of Turkey by the Syrian border. A few days before, this small town, which is one of the political strongholds of the Kurdish movement in Turkey, saw unprecedented levels of violence. Elected representatives were removed from office, 30,000 people lost their homes, and many lost their lives or were injured, while the Turkish military made their presence and power known in this small town and several neighboring cities. So several media photos of this destruction of this small town as a result of the army's intervention were released in the following days. And one of them caught Doğan's attention, the one you can see on top left of this slide. So this image depicted the wrecked city in the background, Turkish flags hanging on the walls of a few buildings still standing, and some boasting soldiers and military vehicles in the foreground, which seems like a carefully constructed image of demonstration of power. Seeing this tearful image, Doğan decided to make her own, and perhaps to ridicule the whole operation, this image. She reworked it on her tablet, turning the vehicles into a T-Rex, a scorpion, and some other dangerous non-human animals, and highlighting the destroyed city in the background among the crimson red of Turkish flags, as you can see at bottom left of this slide. So this image was passionately shared on social media and caused Doğan's sentencing to 2 years and 9 months in prison because of terrorist propaganda, because it was considered to be a terrorist propaganda. So when this news hit the headlines in 2017, so a little later of her sentencing, global society knew a little about the reality of war and conflict in wider Kurdistan, the region that covers the northern parts of Iraq, Syria, and Iran, and Southeast Turkey. That the people of Kurdistan have politically and culturally been oppressed, and as a result were increasingly separated, marginalized, and displaced to other countries. So mobilizing recent violent political events, many new generation artists from Kurdistan produced visual narratives in the last couple of decades. And some of them, such as the performance and installation artist Fatosh Iran, were also previously sentenced to prison for protesting against the Turkish government for its atrocities. Yet the urgency of the unresolved political situation and the long-standing history of conflict indicated that now was a very crucial moment to secure some international recognition for this issue. And somehow a more visible reaction to Doğan's case gradually appeared in the global art world. Some notable names contacted Doğan in prison and spoke for her on her behalf in public. For example, Chinese artist Ai Weiwei released a statement condemning the Turkish government's wrongful action and asking for her release. And also street artist Banksy made a mural depicting black tallies and Doğan herself behind bars with a projection of her painting, as you can see on the right-hand side here. While in prison, Doğan wished to carry on with her artistic practice. However, she was denied access to art materials. The artist was therefore forced to paint with materials that were readily available to her in prison, such as newspapers, tablecloths, and bed sheets. Doğan made her own dyes using menstrual blood, urine, spices, tea, and coffee granules, and she made her brushes from hair and feathers, as you can see on the right-hand side here in that little image. And using the possibilities of the everyday, these works articulated individual and collective memories of war, resistance, and dissent. So in some of them, we can see tattooed faces of Kurdish women who are confronting our gaze with big questioning eyes full of anger, as in this one, which is made on a tablecloth. And in some others, fragile-looking women in groups or alone are depicted in unrecognizable spaces, sitting and waiting, naked, silent, eyes closed. Often a non-human animal is depicted with them, a scorpion, a peacock, or a vulture. Watchful and controlling, like guardians. These animals perhaps symbolize pressure and oppression that the artist faced in prison, or perhaps they stand for the wider Kurdish community who has suffered continuing injustices. So transmission and circulation of collective and individual memories through art in this way seems to be initiating a dialogue with the past and the present, relaying sheets, towels, dresses, and tablecloths, or in other words, textiles, which are already a medium of deep cultural significance. So relaying them in the field of art is especially meaningful for remembering. And they make a very strong case to demonstrate how the experiences of war, conflict, and resistance can be reconstituted as visual forms of knowledge, bridging the transnational, especially the transnational Kurdish community. So now I will move on to talk a little bit about Nadia Alter and her work Topak Ev, or the roundhouse, or a nomad's tent, la yurt. You may have heard of it in with one of these names. And I believe some of the audience here today may be familiar with this work, and I will try to connect this with the work of Kurdish artists and the transnational community and the history of Kurdish violence more broadly. So in October 1973, a life-size Asian-style round tent, as you can see here, appeared in the contemporary art display area of the Musée d'Art Moderne de Paris. When the installation opened to the public, which was called Topak Ev, literally roundhouse, which was created by the artist Nadia Alter, piqued the art world's curiosity. And Istanbulite and the self-proclaimed Marxist feminist who settled in Paris in 1965, Alter modeled Topak Ev after the dwelling houses of the nomadic communities of central Anatolia. The nomadic Bektik community that Alter visited is a part of the primary nomadic group called the Turkmens, or Turkomans, who have historically lived in Anatolia, in the Anatolian geography, and who led a semi-nomadic lifestyle. So a great amount of literature on Topak Ev interpreted the work as an encapsulation of the social and family systems in which the Anatolian woman was believed to live, as a critical commentary on the patriarchal oppression of women. But here in my limited time, as I mentioned, I wish to focus on the ways that Topak Ev gestured towards the violent history of nomads or Kurdish people in Turkey, and that kind of connection between the two. So mostly erased from collective memory today, the voices and stories of the nomads especially are often silenced by master narratives, a theme I believe that underpins this artwork. So Topak Ev channels the related community's experience of oppression and loss as enmeshed in the nomadic past. So the Kurdish people have such a history. For decades, sequentially mobilizing ethnic and national politics to eradicate difference within their own realm, the Ottomans and then the Turks have inflicted the same form of violence upon both of them. By denoting the nomadic world, Topak Ev not only communicates the nomads' threatened and vanishing existence, but also embodies something Carol J. Adams calls an absent referent for the Kurds. What makes this relationship more visible are the inscriptions Alter placed on the outer cover of the tent, especially the excerpts from the work of the Kurdish Turkish novelist Yaşar Kemal. Now you can see some of the inscriptions or the texts that Alter placed outside the tent here. So the long passage that she took from Yaşar Kemal's novel, which was called The Legend of the Thousand Bulls, was published in 1971, only a couple of years before Topak Ev was made. Drawing on his own account and historical facts in this novel, Kemal depicts the story of Turkmen nomads who resisted violent nationwide operations of sedentarization. In fact, in one of her very first interviews about Topak Ev, Nadia Alter asserted that what she wanted to do, what she wanted to say through Topak Ev, Yaşar Kemal had already offered to his readers in his novel. By the time this novel was published, Yaşar Kemal was hailed as an internationally acclaimed writer and an intellectual deeply concerned with the unfair conditions in which minorities were forced to live in Turkey. And having witnessed the destructive effects of the national sedentarization policy in the 1950s and in the 1960s, he was a fierce critic of the government, of the then government. But Kemal's encounter with nomads went back to his childhood, during which he lived in a semi-nomadic village with his family of Kurdish descent. So the convergence of Kemal's ethnic Kurdish ancestry and his novel's subject, together with Yalta's own engagement with his writing, places Topakev at the intersection of unsettling histories faced by nomads as well as Kurdish communities. So Topakev's concern with nomads and Kurds engages similar lines of political and historical inquiry, which aims to reawaken memories of historical trauma and conflict located in critical collective consciousness and memory, which had long been obliterated from the national narrative. So in a way similar to what Zehra Doğan is doing in her artworks. So as Turkmen nomads were being decimated across Turkey because of the systematic and extensive efforts of displacement in the 19th and 20th centuries, Kurdish people were also progressively separated and forcefully migrated. And today, Turkmens and Kurds are described as the two communities that have been highly assimilated and stigmatized in Turkey. So while the long-term political and cultural oppression and assimilation of Kurds is more widely known today, Turkmen nomads who served as the border protectors of the Ottomans long time ago were the first to be targeted by the sedentarization project. And under the late Ottoman rule, those nomadic groups sorry, I lost where I was. Those nomadic groups were perceived as a threat to the project of developing a homogeneous national identity and seen as non-conforming with respect to territorial control and bureaucratic power. So their migration routes were therefore eliminated, and they were gradually and systematically manipulated into buying land. Okay, so Yalta's time in the Spectic nomadic community in Anatolia was devoted to observing their everyday life and recording their inherited practices with her sketches, as well as collecting materials. And then back in Paris, transformed into elaborate, colorful drawings. These sketches were illustrated on a dozen wall panels that were displayed with the tents, which you can see just behind the tent on the left-hand side. And you can see one of the panels on the right-hand side. So these panels show discrete details such as kitchen utensils, stages of making and decorating felt, and the process of building a round tent, and constitute an integral part of this installation. And one of them includes a study of a Kurdish carpet motif. That one is the one on the right. And this is annotated by the artist herself on the panel, which indicates that these sketches and records of this life were more than just an attempt to document aspects of the quotidian existence of the nomads. So while this kind of meticulous assessment aligns with the artist's commitment to studying the diasporic experience of Kurdish people in France, in her later works, her approach to her material reinforces Topakev's position as a site that encapsulates these intertwined worlds of transnational communities such as Kurds and Turkmens, which were sustained and reformed through displacement and oppression. So by constituting Topkapi as a site of resistance and remembrance rather than a mere ethnological study, Yalta, I believe, acts to preserve the memory of the nomadic Turkmen and Kurdish communities and to confront the ingrained translocal conflicts in the Anatolian or maybe in the wider Middle Eastern geography. So thanks to this kind of elements, she has subtly incorporated into its structure, Topkapi, much like Zehra Doğan's works, demands answers for the burdened pasts and presents. So this is where I'm going to stop, and just say that so for the part that I discussed briefly, Nili Altay's work, I drew upon the chapter I wrote for the book, whose cover you can see on the right-hand side, Transnational Perspectives on Feminism and Art, 1960-1985, co-edited by Jen Kennedy, Tristai Mallory, and Angelique Zimanek, which was published just a few months ago by Routledge, an amazing collection of essays. And the first part, I partly drew upon my work in Under the Skin, which was published, as Anais mentioned, later last year, a co-edited collection on feminist art from the Middle East and North Africa. And the first part is also is a part of my current research on Kurdish contemporary art in diasporic communities. So I just wanted to add that, and thanks for coming again, and thank you for your questions in advance.
Thank you, Ceren, for this amazing presentation and very strong works, those of Zehra Doğan and Nili Alter. I also wanted to outline that Nili Alter was received the Ouvert Award in 2018, and she had also a great retrospective at the Macval Museum near from Paris. Is there any question in the audience? I can't see any question in the Q&A, but please ask. We will take 5 to 10 minutes before Nadia's presentation, and then we will also have another final discussion time. So is there any question? No? Yes. From Matilda Tashiska, just yeah, a short comment. Matilda is my colleague, and she said that we were published an interview with Nili Alter, both in French and English. I forgot to mention that.
That's great. Thank you, Matilda. We can move on, Anais. What do you think? And then if there are any questions at the end, I can take them then.
Because I have questions, but they can be both for you and Nadia. So maybe we can move on.
I could also, I mean, I also have a question for Ceren, but I don't want to take the time from the audience, but maybe I can ask it in the meanwhile.
Yeah. Sure.
Thanks a lot. It was really interesting. I just have a question with regards to this sort of last, there was this installation shot and this sort of recording of the know-hows of nomads, and sort of, could you say something maybe about this ethnographic approach, if it's really particular to Nili Alter's work, or is it something which maybe in the 70s, 80s was in sort of conceptual art? Was it generalized in Turkey? I would be very interested.
That's a great question. Thank you, Nadia. I think, well, not in the context of Turkey, but in the context of France. So when we look at that period, 70s, we see a lot of conceptual ethnographic work being produced in France at the time. And actually, I talk about that a little in this chapter that I mentioned. And I draw parallels between the work of Christian Boltanski at the time and Sarkis Zabunyan, who both exhibited their work, which lent themselves really well to what we can now call a type of ethnographic work. Both of them displayed their work at the same space, at the same contemporary art space as Nili Yalter. So, Yalter was still friends with Sarkis Zabunyan, and she always mentions that how she was influenced, also was excited by his work. So there's that connection there. So she was in the middle of that kind of contemporary art production. So I guess it was a little bit popular, and there was interest in the art world by artists to make that kind of ethnographic, ethnologic research and incorporate that into their work. And when we look at reviews and assessments on Nili Yalter's work, especially on Topake, we can see that this has been said a lot, that this was mainly an ethnographic work. That's why she worked really meticulously on these sketches, recorded everything, and tried to create this tent as close to reality as possible. But there's also a sense that I get from those reviews that saying that in a way was a way to downplay the work, and perhaps even resulted in ignoring some other aspects, like these, the more historical aspects or more political points that the artwork wanted to make. So I'm not sure if it helped, that approach really helped for us to understand the work a little bit better. But yeah, does that cover it?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Sorry, in the meantime, we also received another question from Hilary Robinson. So she says, hello, Ceren, that was great, thanks. You say that both artists identify as feminists. Feminism, of course, differs geographically and chronologically, as well as in other ways. So can you say something about what feminism or feminist practice means in Turkey or to Turkish artists? Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Hilary. Hi. Thank you for coming. So yes, thank you. This is a great question. And actually, in this case, I think it's a bit more straightforward. With some other artists, we might not be really easily say that they're feminist. But with these two, because they are self-proclaimed feminists, they, in so many interviews, they note that they are feminists. So it's a bit more clear cut, but as you said, their feminism is different than each other. So, for example, Zehra Doğan says, "I'm a Kurdish, I'm a woman, and I'm a feminist," and she sees all of these interconnected to each other. So maybe there is some Kurdish national involvement in there, in kind of intersection of the Kurdish independence movement in that idea of feminism, because they kind of interconnected to each other in a way. And in the case of Nili Yalter, she says she's a Marxist. She has always been a Marxist feminist, and she comes from a strong political background. Where she was involved in, she was politically active in the 60s in Istanbul before she moved to Paris. And I talk about this as well in my chapter, and her involvement in political parties and where this whole thing was coming from, her creative circles, her social milieu and other influences. So they all come into that discussion. Yes, I think I'm going to leave it there, otherwise I will talk too much and won't leave any time for Nadia. I hope that answers a little bit at least.
That's great, thanks, she says.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ceren. So yeah, let's maybe move to Nadia, and if you receive other questions for you, Ceren, we will I will read them at the end. So Nadia, you are assistant professor of world art history at the University of Bern in Switzerland. You have been also a researcher and a teacher at the American University in Cairo, the American University in Dubai, and the University of Zurich. Your research focuses on Middle Eastern art and architecture, both from the 19th and the 20th centuries, non-Western modernisms, Arab feminisms, nostalgia and Orientalism, and also the Global Museum. Your book, Les Modernes d'Égypte, was published in 2017 at Peter Lang, and you're currently working on your second book, which will be about politics of global abstraction. You are also the co-founder of Manazir, which is a Swiss platform for the study of visual arts, architecture, and heritage in the Middle East, and you're also the editor of Manazir journal. We can find on manazir.art. So Nadia, you can share your
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anaïs, for this introduction. I'll just share my screen presentation right now. Just a minute, sorry. Okay. Share, and I will put it from start. Is it okay now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so I'd like to warmly thank Anaïs and also Ceren for organizing this, this webinar, and of course the AWARE team, and for inviting me on this occasion. So today I'm going to try and keep it short. When you are the last, you don't want to tire people even more. And I also thank the audience for being here. I would like to present a part of my current research, which brings to the fore a number of questions that I have that relate to scholarship on not only on women artists from the Arab world, but also more generally to the study of modernists from the so-called global margin. Of course, today I will focus on women artists and issues that pertain to them. So I'd like to raise some questions and issues concerning methodologies, canon, terminologies, and the sort of manifold epistemic traps, so to speak, that we scholars in those fields are confronted with. So hopefully some of those reflections will also feed the discussion that will follow. And because it's an ongoing research, I'd be very happy to get your feedback and thoughts on those points. So the works by modern and contemporary women artists from the Arab world and the diaspora, or as Ceren said, sort of loosely linked to the Arab world, that I will discuss today, bring to the fore, in my view, strategies of resistance, but also of emancipation, not only from the traditional canon of Western art history, but also, I would argue, from more recent discourses of global art that tend to homogenize difference and conceal particularisms. And this is already one of the first traps that I just mentioned. What I would like to show is that the rhetoric of resistance or rhetorics of resistance that can be found in women or feminist art from the Arab world. And maybe also I can underline that these are all problematic terminologies whether feminist art or even the Arab world or the Middle East. But anyways, I'll stick to the Arab world. Don't necessarily, these forms of resistance don't necessarily rely on the spectacularity of politicized aesthetic, which are today actually increasingly linked to the visual construct of otherness. But rather, those are works that or imply the critical potential of paradigms such as craft that bear other genealogies in the region. And don't worry, I hope this point will become much clearer as I illustrated with several concrete examples. So I'm trying, yeah. So in the study, in the historical study of women Arab artists' commitment to modernism, one paradigm, and this is the topic of today's paper that recurrently emerges, is craft. However, while craft and feminist art has been largely theorized and debated in the West, and in particularly in the US and Europe since the mid-70s. If you think, for instance, of the pattern and decoration movement or Tracy Emin's needlework, etc. The risk here, and this is precisely the problem that I want to underline, is to promptly interpret these works through the lens of Western feminist discourses and associate craft to women's art in a similar manner. The work you see here is by a young Egyptian artist I met. She's London-based, but she's currently in residency in Switzerland, called Nadia El-Kalawi. And her work, I can show you here, another of her works is informed by her personal history dealing with lost traces of memories and fiction that she also expresses in her tapestries. And this tapestry that depicts a woman from the back lying down in an interior setting that also displays symbols of her double belonging between Egypt and the UK, is emblematic of her tapestry work. The woman is also watching a live performance by the famous Egyptian singer Kulthum on television. So for El-Kalawi, the medium of tapestry is, I quote, touches upon domesticity, womanhood, and gender identity, but it is also an embodiment of the pace of the handmaid, particularly in an age where the image and its output is digital. So while she blends the materiality of the traditional weaving processes with digital images in her works, she also explained to me that for her, tapestry, carpets, woven textiles remain closely linked to Egyptian visual culture. And because her primary medium is painting, to which she then incorporates drawing, animation, digital media, and tapestry, her work also brings to the fore an important aspect, which is the self-referentiality of the painterly medium. And this particular aspect is reminiscent of tapestry works by early modernists from the Arab world. For instance, you can see here this tapestry by the Lebanese artist and theorist Salwa Raouda Choucair, who was trained in Beirut and Paris, moved to Paris in 1948, where she frequented briefly the studio of Fernand Léger before she actually became a very active member of l'Atelier de l'Art Abstrait, together with artists such as Edgar Pillet, Jean Dewan, and Victor Vasarely. And so Shuker, who was also a sculptor, but also made jewelries and experimented other types of crafts, often used weaving and the craft of tapestry while formally referring to the geometrical forms and bold colors of her abstract painting. So crafts is not used here in a folklorist manner, but really to reference, as I mentioned before, abstraction. And the same pertains to the artist and writer and poet Etel Adnan. I mean, I'm sure many of you know those artists. They are now internationally renowned, although they were recognized quite lately in their careers. And so Adnan, who like Shuker grew up in Beirut during the French Mandate, was educated until the age of 15 in Lebanon before she went to Paris with a scholarship to study philosophy at the Sorbonne, before she moved to California in 1955 to study at Berkeley. So I'd like to underline here that Shuker and Adnan's tapestries, far from being solely decorative, as some have qualified, may actually embody a political claim, and a political claim that goes beyond the feminist positioning with regards to craft, but rather calls for a broadening and a rethinking of both the definition of craft and the definition of abstraction. So, as I just mentioned, while the scholarship on Western feminism and contemporary art had sort of singled out the use of traditionally feminine crafts and hobby art, etc., in the Middle East and North Africa, weaving, for instance, remains a traditional know-how that is not necessarily confined to the feminine worlds, but that is also closely linked to identity politics and decolonization. And the origins of this reflection can be traced back to movements of the 40s, when intellectuals called for a revival of craftsmanship throughout the Arab world and created tapestry schools conceived as part of the identity building of decolonial cultural projects. And these schools went against the assertion that the fine arts imposed by colonial presence were superior to applied or decorative arts understood as locally rooted. So in other words, they were also established in response to an imposed hierarchy between high and low arts that also reflected asymmetrical power structures of that time. And this was the case, for instance, of a tapestry school founded in the early 50s by an Egyptian architect, pedagogue, and intellectual called Ramses Wisawasef. And you can see here an image of this school, which is called Ramses Wisawasef Art Center, and it is still in activity today. And it's interesting to note that Etel Adnan, for instance, like many other abstract artists of her generation, had visited that center and was also marked by Wisawasef's pedagogical and ideological theories of craft in his weaving, through his sort of weaving workshops and apprentices, and also his natural dyeing techniques. So interestingly, the artist I spoke of at the beginning, Nadia El-Kalawi, the young Egyptian artist, also told me that the Wisawasef tapestries were for her an important reference. And here you see just an image of a weaver, contemporary image in that center. So craft, not only as a medium, but also as a practice, could be comprehended beyond the quest of a national pan-Arab aesthetic, but as a means to reconcile handmade practices, craft, and also the ornaments, which have been considered exogenous to Western avant-garde, so to reconcile those practices with the notion of modernism. And you can see here, for instance, an earlier example, again, a work by the artist, feminist, and political activist Ingia Flatoun. I took this image from the Aware website, actually, that shows a loom, and that also represents this interest in the 50s for craft practices. And Ingia Flatoun, and this reminded me also when Ceren was talking about Zahra Dogan, was also arrested, not necessarily for her paintings directly, but for her political activities in the communist youth organization, and also continued painting in prison. And I mean, it's not the topic today, so I'm not going to show you any of those paintings, but it also impacted a lot, as Ceren showed us with Zahra Dogan, her artistic practice. So I believe maybe at that point, it's also necessary to make a little step backwards in history in order to underline the major role also that was played by Egyptian feminist intellectuals in the revival and promotion of crafts. Beyond being important art patrons, notably by sponsoring institutions, exhibitions, and young artists, these intellectuals were also very active in the fields of education and charitable organizations. So the domain of charity also represented access to a space in the public arena that was formerly dominated by colonial philanthropic women organizations. And the Egyptian Feminist Union that was founded in 1923 by Hoda Sha'arawi was committed within those charitable organizations also to the revival of crafts and traditional know-how, linked, of course, to the discourse of authenticity. And these ideas were published in the union's review called L'Égyptienne, published in French, that Sha'arawi co-edited with her colleague, Cezana Bahraoui. And you can see here the representation also of the ancient Egyptian spinner, so a direct reference as a part of a narrative of this revival of arts and crafts and the narrative of authenticity. And in 1924, Hoda Sha'arawi founded an artisanal school in the extremely poor neighborhood called Rod El Farag in the north of Cairo, in order to offer free training to young Egyptian girls and boys in the field of pottery and ceramic. And the main objective of the school was also to serve this decolonial discourse produced by producing ceramics that were made, I quote, by the children of the country in the purest Egyptian tradition. But these ceramics were, however, the work of highly qualified craftsmen that were educated also in France, as you can see on this photograph published in L'Égyptienne, showing a collection of large enameled vases and plates, finely decorated with interlacing floral and geometric elements. And this interest in the revival of crafts and Arab or Islamic art was later pursued by the poet, writer, and reformer Doria Shafiq, one of the leaders of the women's liberation movement in Egypt in the mid-40s. And what I find also interesting on the two covers of La Femme Nouvelle, which you see here on that slide, the review she edited, is the iconography, which on the one hand outlines a certain image of the modern emancipated Egyptian woman, and on the other hand, the rather sober reference to traditional Islamic art. And the fact that they appear in a few, that they appear one after the other, seems to attest that there is not much contradiction between these pictorial identities, and maybe not only pictorial identities. And it also outlines the specificity of what it meant to be a feminist and what it meant to be a modern and emancipated woman in that specific context. So that being said, I'd like to just briefly come back now to a more contemporary example, and I will also conclude with that artist and that example, who is Suzanne Hefuna, and the works you see here are the works of this German Egyptian artist who grew up in Egypt before studying at Frankfurt am Main Städelschule, and who currently, and she's also extremely renowned, so maybe many of you know her already, currently works between Cairo, Düsseldorf, and New York. And Hefuna's work focuses on abstract structures, on grid patterns, as you can see here on the watercolor on the left, lines and connectivity. And she weaves links between DNA molecules, traditional palm wood crates, pieces of embroidery, or architectural or city plans. And a key moment for her, she explained to me, is when lines intersect the points of friction that can recall urban crossroads, but also a sort of space-time where paths meet, whether it's in the winding streets of a cityscape or in handmade crafts such as mashrabeyas. And the mashrabeyas, these wooden latticework screens, which you can see here also on the right of this slide, which are photographs of actual mashrabeyas in her series Cityscape Cairo. They are really a leitmotif, or at least a fundamental structure of her work, a salient feature, but they are also, a salient feature of traditional Middle Eastern architecture. And just for those who may not be acquainted with those elements, here is an example of these mashrabeyas that allow light to penetrate inside the building, but also make it possible to see without being seen. And this is probably also one of the reasons why these screens have fueled the European Orientalist imaginary in the 19th century. So as a transitional object between inside and outside, the intimate and the public, between the self and the other, the mashrabeya in Hefuna's work is also a metaphor of the cultural projections that the artist questions and deconstructs. Another handcrafted object that she incorporates in her work are the traditional crates, afas, that are made of palm wood and that are used in Egypt. You see them everywhere in Cairo, in the city, on the streets. They're used for many different purposes by street vendors to transport or display goods. And here you see them displayed in the Sharjah Art Foundation in the United Arab Emirates. Also sort of pointing to this idea again of the city and the cityscape. But what I find interesting, not only in Hefuna's work, but also in others, is the suggestion of a new take on the notion of the grid, notion which has been central to discourses of Western modernism and which has been ever since the early 20th century, in the words of Rosalind Krauss, emblematic of the modernist ambition within the visual arts. And so if Krauss has rightly affirmed in her seminal article about grids published in 1979, that for Western art history, the grid announces, I quote, modern art's will to silence, its hostility to literature, to narrative, to discourse, end quote, I would argue that this form may have taken another stance in different stories of modernism, and then that in its genealogies, not only with craft, but also with Islamic art and other traditional practices, new takes on the grid may have the potential to contest narratives of traditional art historical canons, and especially when it comes to abstraction. During a 3-month residency she had in Stein am Rhein, which is a very picturesque and highly touristic town in Switzerland, in the canton of Schaffhausen, Suzanne Hefuna started working on the timber frame structures of traditional houses. And you can see here on the right her black and white photographs from this project, Crossroads Stein, which show the facades of the timber framed houses. But however, the close framing of these carpentry elements, which emphasize sort of the structure of these wooden textures, is reminiscent of the mashrabeya, and thus transform these familiar structures, familiar at least for the European tourist or passerby, into something unknown, into something exotic. And in her performance, Crossroads Stein, where she evoked the traditional codes of the carnival, Hefuna printed the digitized patterns of the timber frames on textile in order to create the costume of an eerie and mysterious veiled figure, which she called the Steiner Hes, in reference to the traditional carnival. And so walking through the town streets for hours, dragging a stone on the train of her costume, she created an uncanny scene that sort of questioned and disrupted the passerby's gaze. And she did so by transferring a familiar crafted object into an unusual context, and therefore, well, in my view, operated a decentering of the notion of craft and primitivism. And this brings me now to my conclusion. What I've tried to show in the works I really briefly discussed today is that the incorporation of craft cannot be understood solely as a feminine approach, neither only as a solution to deal with identity politics, but it should also be analyzed as a challenge to the critical notion of modernism, which is actually an unsettled notion in the region. And so in my view, artists such as Salwa Hawda Shuker, Etel Adnan, or Suzanne Hefuna defy this implicitly monocultural narrative and the broadening of its definition, and also of the definition of abstract art, is a claim, in my view, for emancipation in itself. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Nadia, for the fantastic presentation. I really love these parallels you drew between different practices, times, and geographies, and questioning canons of modernity, and also this leads us also to question of methods and methodologies, but maybe I have a few questions about that for you and also for Ceren, but maybe the audience wants to ask questions first to you, Nadia. I saw one question for Ceren, but I saw you also already answered about under the skin. Yeah. So if there are any question, we have less than 10 minutes before the end of our webinar. Yeah, we have one from Andrea Giunta, a long one. So I will read it. Thank you, Nadia. Some of the artists represented study in Europe. However, you read their work in decolonial and emancipatory terms. It reminds me of the readings of the work of Nasrin, sorry, I lost the, of Nasrin Mohammadi, who has a European background, and her work allowed the reading between European abstraction and a decolonial approach. So her question is, could you elaborate more the relationship between these works, the traditions of Egypt and the formation in European modernity? I am curious about if your interpretation is shared by Egyptian art historians.
Thank you very much. I think there are many questions in that one question, but maybe I start from the beginning. Yes, I read the work of artists from the diaspora in decolonial and emancipatory terms. It's not my reading. I mean, their works are fundamentally political. Et El Adnan is so also in her writings. The work of Salwa Hawdashuker was also, and the sort of issues, identity issues and identity politics that are negotiated when one lives abroad or one comes from multiple cultures, I think is a certain fragility that pertains to the work of many of those artists, and that is also addressed by them. I mean, for me, it wouldn't make any sense. I look at artworks, I speak with artists, it wouldn't make any sense to draw a clear line between who lives where. We are dealing with the politics of identity and certain deconstructions of frameworks and canons in which actually one fits even less when one is from the diaspora, in my view. So this would be my first point. And so the traditions of Egypt and the formation I don't understand really the meaning of the traditions of formation. You mean training? I guess, yes. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have, this is something I worked on a lot actually in my book, Les Modernes d'Égypte, was the whole institutional apparatus of training that started actually in Egypt in the early 20th century, and that was based mainly on the Parisian model of the École des Beaux-Arts, and actually the whole intellectual debates, which as of the inception of such schools, the debate between high and low arts and applied arts and fine arts already started then. And I think that it's somehow an ongoing, I would say, issue, because it's quite rooted in art discourses. And finally, I don't know if my interpretation is shared by my peers. I mean, I always integrate, or at least in my work, integrate the work of my peers, of my Egyptian peers. And yeah, I think I will stop here. I hope that's okay. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Nadia. I had also one question, but yeah, maybe the one from Ceren first, because mine is for both of you. Ceren, do you want me to read it? Okay. So that was fantastic, Nadia. I would love to hear more about NGF Latoun's prison's work, but I understand that it's not your focus today. While listening to your discussion of El Kalawi and others artist tapestry works, I remember Jessica Gerschul's recovery of the dismissed craftworks / fiber art by women artists at the Lausanne Tapestry Biennial. Can we draw parallels?
Thanks a lot, Ceren. I mean, it would be very difficult to talk about NGF Latoun's prison work, but I would like to point out that one of my colleagues who also wrote for Aware, Nadina Talla, is really the specialist. So I wouldn't want to sort of appropriate myself, you know, sort of the, yeah, but so I would also refer to her works, and yeah, I would gladly also talk about this with you, maybe on another occasion, because I think there is a lot to say, and maybe you could even, I think you can draw parallels with your example. And yeah, I did find also in Under the Skin, Gertschul's article very informing, and I saw many parallels with the absences that one finds in archives, also a kind of, yeah, epistemic absences created by the archive, and which then of course falls through. And I think that she sort of elaborated on that point in a very subtle manner with the example of the tapestry biennale in Lausanne. I mean, when reading that article, I could draw many similarities, but I guess that we're all sort of facing sometimes the absences of actual archives, or within the archives, the absences that were created purposely, or omissions, or, you know, and then which sort of are rewritten or transmitted, and it just ends up creating a history where there are a lot of missing elements and actors, actually. Yeah.
Thank you, Nadia. I think we have to end this webinar, and thank you really again for this very rich conversation. Ceren, Özpinar, Nadia, Radwan, and Lina, Kattan, who had to leave earlier. It was really a fantastic panel discussion, and again, thank you, Ceren, for having invited Nadia and Lina for this webinar. We definitely learned a lot about modern and contemporary women artists of Middle Eastern origin, as well as current challenges about feminist research, even if we could stay for hours debating about these issues. So thank you to the audience for assisting and participating to the talk. Please stay tuned, because I will soon communicate on our next webinar guest in October. And of course, stay connected to our social networks and website to have Aware's last updates on women artists. And if you want any reference, a book reference from Nadia, Lina, or Ceren, please just send an email, and I can also send you information about their research. So thank you again.
Thank you, Anais. Thanks for organizing, and thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.